After graduating from college, I lived in a tiny studio apartment in Chicago. It wasn't luxurious, just one modest room tucked on the top floor of a 3-story building. I picked it mainly because the rent was low, and it was near my job. At 23, burdened with student loans and no savings, I couldn't afford to be selective. The place was simple, tidy, practical, and most of all, it was mine. The only window in my apartment overlooked a narrow alleyway. Directly across stood another building that looked almost exactly like mine. The alley was so tight a single car could barely fit through, and during the day, sunlight rarely reached it. At night, it turned completely dark. I never minded that much. Back then, I worked late shifts bartending at a lounge on the north side. Most nights, I'd get home around 2:30 or 3 a.m., throw together a quick meal, and scroll through my phone until sleep took over. One night, about a month after moving in, something strange caught my eye. I'd just come home, slipped off my shoes, and flipped on the overhead light when I thought I saw movement in the window across the alley. Just a quick flash, like a curtain shifting. I paused, staring, but the window stayed dark and still. I brushed it off, figuring I'd either startled someone, or maybe it was just the wind playing tricks. The following night, it happened again. The moment I flicked on my lights, I caught the curtain shift in that same window. This time I was certain. A hand had drawn it back just a little before letting it drop. Whoever was behind it stayed hidden. The apartment across remained dark. No lights at all, just that faint ripple of movement in an otherwise black void. What unsettled me most, though, was that I had never once seen the lights on in that place. I'd always assumed it was empty. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept circling back to that attic window and the hand I'd glimpsed. Over the next week, I began watching more closely. Night after night, without fail, the curtain shifted within seconds of me switching on my lights. Subtle, but unmistakable. Always the same, a slow parting of the fabric, a fleeting glimpse of the darkness behind it, and then the curtain sliding shut once more. I started experimenting. Some nights I'd keep the lights off and sit quietly by the window. When I did, nothing moved. But the instant I switched a light on, even just the faint lamp by the couch, the curtain across the alley stirred. Someone was watching me. That much was clear. I tried to talk myself out of it, telling myself maybe it was just someone who liked staring out their window at night. But that didn't explain the timing. It didn't explain how it always happened the moment I came home. That was far too much of a coincidence. I asked my landlord about the apartment across the alley, and he said it had been vacant for months. I pushed a little, wondering if maybe someone had moved in without him knowing, but he just shook his head. He even laughed, saying I was probably being paranoid. I thought about calling the police, but in the end I didn't. Reporting someone possibly staring at me from an empty apartment felt absurd. There was no evidence, no crime, just a feeling that grew heavier with each passing night. Then one night, things escalated. I came home later than usual, around 4 a.m. The bar had hosted a private event, cleanup dragged on, and I was exhausted, moving on autopilot. As I reached my door, I noticed something wedged in the frame. At first, I thought it was a flyer or some junk mail, but when I pulled it out, it was a crumpled note. In pen, it simply said, "Hey." My knees went weak. Instantly, I thought of the apartment across the alley. I rushed to the window and peered out. The curtain was drawn tight, no movement. I called my friend Jaime in a panic. She lived clear across town, but told me to come over immediately. I threw some essentials into a backpack and left. The next day, I went back to the landlord, this time demanding to see the apartment across the alley. He hesitated, but eventually agreed to meet me there with the key. Inside, the place was dusty and completely bare, not a scrap of furniture anywhere. The walls were stripped, and the old wooden floor groaned under our steps. But in the back room, the one facing my window, sat a single metal folding chair. It was placed squarely in front of the glass. Someone had been inside an apartment that was supposed to be locked and empty. The police were called, and they went through the place. I'm pretty sure they dusted for fingerprints, but nothing ever came of it. Knowing my paranoia had been justified, that someone really had been watching me, made me feel sick, imagining how long they sat there staring. I moved out that same week. Even now, I don't know who it was, how they got in, or how long it would have continued if I hadn't found that note saying, "Hey." For a while, I even suspected the landlord, but I had to let that go. There's no way he wouldn't have removed that chair before taking me inside. I still dream of that window, and some nights I wake up with the unshakable sense that someone somewhere is still watching. When I was 12, my family relocated to a remote stretch of Oregon, far from the nearest town. Our home sat on a vast piece of land hemmed in by thick pine forest. It was serene, hushed, and utterly isolating. The house itself dated back to the 1940s, complete with all the hallmarks of an old home: creaking floors, a shadowy attic, and a detached, weather-beaten shed about 30 feet from the back door. That shed overflowed with rusted tools and leftover junk from the previous owner. My dad always planned to clear it out, but never did. For the most part, we avoided it altogether. I remember the first time something felt off. It was a weeknight, close to midnight. I was under the covers with a flashlight, sneaking in some reading, when Max, our golden retriever, erupted into frantic barking. He was usually friendly but sharp, and when he barked like that, it meant trouble. I slipped out of bed and peeked through the window. Max was planted in front of the shed, barking into the dark. The motion sensor light by the back door was glowing, throwing long, jagged shadows across the yard. I couldn't see anyone out there, but Max wouldn't quit. I stayed at the window until he settled down, then turned away. The next morning, we discovered deep boot prints pressed into the dirt between the house and the shed. My dad brushed it off, saying it was probably a neighbor wandering through or some drifter passing by, but I couldn't shake it. Over the next few weeks, Max kept barking at that shed, over and over. Each time we'd check, there'd be nothing there, but the footprints would return, always leading straight to the shed, never away from it. One night, around 2 in the morning, I woke to the crunch of footsteps on the gravel outside my window. I froze, holding my breath. The steps paused, then started again, heading toward the shed. I eased the blinds open, just as the back door light flicked on, and for a heartbeat, I saw him. A tall man standing by the shed door, wrapped in what looked like a filthy gray coat. His face was swallowed by shadows. Then the light blinked out. My heart hammered as I stumbled back from the window and rushed to wake my parents. My dad grabbed his rifle and stormed outside, but the man was gone. Only the fresh footprints remained, right up to the shed. This time, my dad chose to look inside. He unlatched the padlock and swung the doors open, but there was nothing, just piles of rusty tools and faded tarps. He put on a new lock, reinforced the doors, and for a while, everything went quiet. Then, about a month later, Max disappeared. We searched everywhere, through the woods, up and down the road, even asked the neighbors, but he was gone. I was crushed. Part of me clung to the hope that he'd simply gotten lost and would come back. That night, I didn't sleep at all. My mind kept circling the shed, Max, and the man I'd seen around 3 a.m. The back door creaked. I slipped out of bed and crept into the hallway. My dad was already awake, rifle in hand. We moved to the door together, just as the motion light flickered on. There he was, standing by the shed again. But this time he was holding something. In one hand, a knife. In the other, Max's collar. The sight hollowed me out. It felt as though the air drained from my chest, a sick, weightless sensation like I might collapse right there. My dad shouted and lifted the rifle, but the man spun and bolted into the woods. We called the police, and they combed the area but came up empty. What they uncovered inside the shed, though, made me sick. The floor had been swept clean, and carved into the dirt were strange symbols, crude, unsettling shapes. In one corner lay a heap of bones. Animal bones. I prayed, but it got worse. Behind a false panel in the wall, the officers found a backpack stuffed with things that weren't ours. Wallets, watches, worn bits of clothing, belongings that had to have come from someone. More than one someone. The strangest thing they pulled out was a notebook. Page after page filled with strange symbols, incoherent rambling in jagged handwriting, and crude sketches of houses, families, and staring eyes. To me, it felt like some kind of message, a warning that he'd been watching us the same way he'd watched others. The police collected the notebook along with everything else they found. That night, as we were packing to leave, I glanced out my window toward the shed. The police tape fluttered in the breeze. The yard eerily still, but just beyond it, maybe 10 feet into the tree line, I saw a face. The instant I blinked, it vanished. I screamed my dad's name, panic breaking out of me, yelling, "He's back." My dad charged into the room, rifle already in his hands, asking where. I pointed toward the shed, to the left near the woods. He bolted outside, shouting like a madman, and fired a round into the night. You can't imagine the rage of being driven from your own home by a dangerous stranger who likely killed your dog. In that moment, my dad let every ounce of his fury loose. I think he truly wanted to kill that man. We moved out just days later to a far less remote part of Oregon. In the summer of 2018, my friends and I, Abby, Marcus, his younger brother Tim, Tim's girlfriend Hannah, and me, planned a weekend escape to the Blue Ridge Mountains. We were all in our early 20s, fresh out of college, craving a break from screens and city noise. We chose a remote spot deep inside the national park, where the forest grew dense, the air was thick with pine and damp earth, and not a trace of cell signal could reach us for miles. The first night went perfectly. We hiked in with our packs, found a small clearing by a lake just big enough for 3 tents, built a fire and roasted hot dogs and marshmallows. We swapped stories, had a few drinks, and stayed up late beneath the sky bursting with stars. The stillness of the forest felt calm, almost comforting. It wasn't until the second night that things started to feel off, around 11 p.m. We were still laughing around the fire when Marcus suddenly froze, staring into the trees. He pointed and asked if we'd seen it too. We all turned, but the woods were still. He swore he'd caught movement, a figure slipping behind a tree, maybe 30 or 40 yards away. Tim brushed it off as a deer, but 20 minutes later, a sharp crack echoed from the same spot, like a branch snapping underfoot. This time it was loud. Abby went pale and said she wanted to call it a night. Everyone agreed. We doused the fire, zipped up our tents, and tried to sleep. That night, I woke to something that still chills me. Breathing, just outside the tent, no more than 10 feet from my head. At first, I thought I was still half asleep, imagining it, but the sound went on. I tried to rationalize, maybe one of the others had slipped out to pee, but I didn't hear a stream of water, just that ragged breathing. It sounded older somehow, like someone who'd smoked for decades, short of breath. My hand groped for my flashlight, but I couldn't bring myself to switch it on. The breathing shifted, moving slowly from one side of the tent to the other, then fell silent. I lay there frozen, waiting, because there was nothing else I could do. When the sound stopped so abruptly, relief washed over me, convincing me it had just been one of my friends after all. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. In the morning, I kept quiet, and so did Abby. But when we gathered for breakfast, Marcus wore a tense, restless look, like he couldn't wait to speak. Finally, he said someone had been outside our tent during the night. Hannah nodded right away, saying she'd heard it too, and that whoever it was circled the tent more than once. She even thought it might have been more than one person. I asked everyone if they'd gotten up to pee, thinking maybe that explained the noise. Tim admitted he had, but then added that around 4 a.m. he thought he saw a figure crouched near the fire pit. We combed the area and found footprints pressed into the dirt, circling all 3 tents. In one patch where the ground was softer, almost muddy, a single print stood out clearly, a bare human foot, not a shoe or boot. That made everything feel even stranger. The prints trailed off into the woods and disappeared. We tried to laugh it off, tossing out theories about some weird hiker or a prankster, but none of it felt like a joke. That night, we stayed up later than before, huddled close to a much larger fire, our flashlights within reach. Around 2 a.m., the sound started again, the crunch of leaves somewhere out in the dark. But this time there was a voice, low, too faint to make out, but undeniably human. Marcus snapped his flashlight toward the noise, and for the briefest second we saw him, a man completely naked, crouched behind a nearby tree. The beam caught him, and he bolted, scrambling back into the woods like a wild animal that had just been exposed. We were stunned, paralyzed. None of us dared break off to retreat into our tents. Staying together in the open felt like the only safety we had. Hannah urged us to pack up and leave, but Marcus and I said that was a terrible idea. Tearing down camp in the dark and hiking back to the car would be almost impossible. And worse, we'd have to do it knowing that man could be somewhere behind us, following. That night was the worst yet, maybe one of the worst nights of my life. I didn't sleep a single second. I lay there, wide awake, and in some twisted way that might have saved me, or at least my things. Hours crawled by before I heard it. A distant stick snapping, leaves crunching underfoot. Under my breath I whispered, "Please let it be a fasterisk, asterisk, asterisk, ing deer." A few beats of silence followed. Then, from somewhere out in the trees, a voice answered, "I see you guys." It wasn't any of my friends. I couldn't tell if they were awake, if they'd heard it too. No one moved, no one spoke. Maybe they were frozen just like me, or maybe I was the only one who heard. I stayed absolutely still, too terrified to make a sound. What happened next? I never could have imagined. I felt my tent shift, just the faintest tug, and shot upright, staring at the zipper. Slowly, deliberately, it began to slide down. I let out a scream, loud and raw, and my friends erupted too, shouting from their tents. Whoever was on the other side bolted, or at least I think they did. I can't know for sure. All I know is we were yelling back and forth, trying to reassure each other through the thin fabric walls. I yanked the zipper shut again and stayed frozen, straining to hear any breath or footsteps, but there was nothing. I didn't sleep at all. I just sat there, clutching my flashlight, watching as the first pale light of morning crept across the campsite. At dawn, we broke camp in silence and hiked out, every step heavy with tension. Even as the trees thinned and the car came into view, none of us felt relief. At the ranger station, we spilled everything. The footprints, the breathing, the voice, the zipper. The ranger listened, his face unreadable, then said they'd had reports before. A man, maybe more than one, living out there. Some said they stole things. Others hinted at worse. We didn't ask what worse meant. Back in the car, we tried to laugh, make light of it, but the laughter felt hollow. I don't think I can ever camp again after that, especially after the zipper.